Finish up Siman Tesvav, and maybe we'll do Siman Tezzayin today as well. So Siman Tesvav, the last Seif. So this is really a hemshech of what we talked about last time. The Mechaber had said that you're not allowed, if there's a tear within 3 finger lengths of the corner, you're not allowed to fix it. Now, what was the reason? He brought down 2 different shittas, but according to Rashi, the concern is, forget about tzitzis, there's no tzitzis on the corner, but you have a tear. So the concern is, let's say it's a linen baguette. I sew it up with a linen string, and that string is hanging down, and I say to myself, I might as well just take 7 other strings and add to it. I have a string there anyway. The problem is, it wasn't nitvar l'shem, it's a tzitzis, and therefore it's a problem shaloi l'shma. That's what the Mechaber had said. So the Mechaber just speaks it out. Hatoifer chatichas beged bekanfei hatalis, if you're sewing, let's say you're adding a patch to the corner, v'chein mashanoigim litfor sav v'anekev, or forget about a patch, you want to make tzitzis, so you make the hole, and then they sew around the hole. They sew around the hole like a reinforcement around the hole. Now, if it's a linen, now we spoke last time, according to the Rashi, it's not a problem if it's wool string, because it's not normal to use wool to sew up a tear with wool. So you could sew up a tear with wool because there's no concern that it's not normal to do this, so therefore it's not a problem. But that's why this is not practically much of an issue for us. But if you're sewing up, let's say, with linen, Lavan yesh lochush b'dvar Rashi shaloi teheshum tefira lamata megimel lamayla mekesher goydel. You cannot, that area that's roi for tzitzis, which is above a finger length, a thumb length, but within 3 thumb lengths, that area you can't sew it up. You have to be careful. And any time if you're sewing on a beged and it's the same material of said beged, you have to be very careful. It's just reiterating the previous halacha. The Mishnah Berurah does point out, though, as I said before, in Chav Beis, you're allowed to sew it up with wool because it was not normal to sew up a beged with wool, so there was not a concern that if you sew up a beged with wool that you'll turn it into tzitzis. It wasn't a normal occurrence, therefore it wasn't included in the gzera. Okay, let's do Siman Tezzayin, a new Siman. We'll be able to do the whole Siman right now. The Mechaber says, Shir talis. What is the shear of the talis? Shechayv b'tzitzis, she'iskasa by ba'oirech u'b'roichev. It has to be the shear that you can cover in width and in length. Roishay v'ruboy shel katan. The majority, the head and the majority of the body of a child, is able to walk to the marketplace alone without being escorted. So when that child, which the Mishnah Berurah says, ben teshanim, 9-year-old, a 9-year-old boy, if you have a beged that covers his head and the majority of his torso, majority of his body, so head and chest, bekitzer, a beged that's able to wrap a child's head and chest, that's chayiv in tzitzis. Less than that is not going to be chayiv in tzitzis. Says the Ramah, v'oz chayiv b'tzitzis, and that's when it's chayiv. Now, there was a second shir the Gemara had mentioned, which is a godol mahalich b'shuk, that an adult would wear that and go to the street and not be embarrassed. Says the Ramah, v'davke kisha godol loiv shoy pa'amim arai v'yotze b'lashuk. In addition to that, it's big enough to cover a child. An adult has to be comfortable to put it on every once in a while. Now the Mefarshim give a geder. It's hard with our tzitzis because our tzitzis is mamash open on the side. So if you're not wearing anything under it, let's say you're wearing a t-shirt. Let's say the tzitzis are held a little bit tight. If it's big enough that you would bring the trash to the front street, you're not going to walk on Main Street without it. But maybe to bring it to the trash, efshar. Again, you have to know. So we'll get to the shear. What is the exact measurements of this? Practically, we'll get to in a second. But if you look at the Mishnah Berurah in Aleph, he says, "B'tshuvas Ramah." It's actually not the Ramah; it's the Maram Mintz. The Tshuvas Maram Mintz is mafalpa heich yoytzim medali kanfes hakatanim is hashir. This, as we'll see, whatever the shear is, 3/4 of an amma, whatever the shear is. Apparently, people's tzitzises, talisos kitanim, were always smaller than this. And l'chora, if it's smaller than this, you're not yoytz of the mitzvah. So the Maram Mintz, who's one of the Rishonim, was already bothered by this. He says, "What's going on?" And he says, "V'toyrif dvarav," and bekitzer, his answer is, "The mutter leilich behem leilich kol yoyim belitzes." It's better to wear that than to not wear tzitzis at all. Okay, no meaning. I got not much, but at least it's better than nothing. Okay. Ubedarki Moshe kasa lamida am shivarchu b'bayger al talos gadol v'yiftur es hakatan v'yechol boy kol yoyim. This says the Ramah is the reason why married men or Sfardim make the bracha on a talis gadol. Why does he make the bracha on a talis gadol? If a talis katan and talis gadol are all the same, why am I waiting to go to shul? The reason is because of this. A lot of talisas katanim were not the right shear. It's better for them to make a bracha Now you do have the concept that you're wearing a dalit kanfus, but if it's not, meaning the issue is really the bracha, because if it's so small, what's the issue? You're wearing a dalit kanfus without the tzitzis. You're mevatel mitzaseh. If it's so small, you're not mechayev. What's the problem? The problem is the bracha levatala. That's the major issue of wearing it. Shabbos is, you're right, Shabbos is a problem of wearing it without an Erev, but during the week, the major issue is the bracha. So he says, okay, so make the bracha on the talis gadol. That's why it evolved that way. By the way, I mentioned once that there's like a misconception that married men or Sfaradim don't make a bracha on talis gadol. That's not true. It's just that the talis gadol patters it. But if you were to change begadim, let's say in the afternoon, like for Shabbos, let's say I wear a special Shabbos tzitzis. So when you put on new tzitzis for Shabbos, you're not wearing a talis gadol afterwards. So you'd have to make a bracha. Pashas. Now, I will say this though. There's a sheet of the Aruch HaShulchan. It's good to know. I don't know if we pass in this way. The Aruch HaShulchan says his whole shaila is for nothing. He says the shear is for a talis gadol. A talis katan doesn't have a shear. That's the Aruch HaShulchan sheet. It's a very mechudish shita. He says that talis katan doesn't have a shear. So the shaila is how everyone wears. He says this shear is for a talis gadol, which is meant to be mechasa the whole body. But a talis katan, which is just meant to go over your head, if it gets over your head, you yotza. That's a shear. That's a shita. Again, I guess it's a limud tzchus and klal yisrael. Aruch HaShulchan is a big malam tzchus and klal yisrael, so that's one of them. Okay, so now the Mishnah Berurah says in Beis v'az chai v'tzitzis gadol haloiv shel afukim ein zeh hashir shel reisha v'ruba az l'kuli alma pater. You need the shear of covering a child. You don't necessarily need the shear that you would wear it out every once in a while. Meaning, if let's say it's something I would wear out, but it's smaller than would cover a child, that would not be yotza. Says in Mishnah Berurah, "Fil magadol yotza by bakra l'shuk." Achem derech anshi hamakom shegadol yechab b'keva. Listen, if it's the kvias, people would wear it like that gedolim. That's a different story. But if you just have the gedolim, but you don't have the shear for the ketanim, it does not work. He says like this in Daled, what's l'shuk? Or the pesach beisa berchoiv. Again, like I said, to take out the garbage. Let's say it's the shear for a katan, but a gadol would not wear it. Again, you have to. We're going to give measurements now, but before measurements, you would sort of like have ashara. And therefore, it's better to avoid the shaila and to not make a bracha on something unless it's gadol enough. Now, what is the practical shear? Be'inyan hashir roishay v'rubai. What is the practical shear? Kasa b'sefer priya aretz b'shem sefer derechayim sheshira gimel rivoi mil ba'orech v'chatzi ama b'reichav. 3/4 of a mil in length and half at 3/4 of an amma in length and half an amma in width. That means, by the way, the entire shear. 3/4 of an amma is not that much. Let's say it's an amma. Was it 24 inches? So it's about 16 to 18 inches in length. It's not that much. It's very small, and half an amma in width. But says in Mishnah Berurah, they say that's too small. There's no way, because by the way, 24 inches to cover both sides of your body is tiny. They say no. Minig anshe ma'isa l'daktik, the minig of Klal Yisrael is to be careful. Sheba amim l'afanav v'amim l'achrav. You have an am in front, an am in the back, not including the neck hole. That is the minig of the Klal Yisrael. Is an amma. An amma is anywhere between 18 inches and 24 inches, depending on whatever sheet you have. That's why I think I wear 26. It's good to try to wear longer. To at least you want to be machmer l'chol day. So I think an amma is 24 inches. I think is Ramosha 22, 24, something like that. In the back of the kitzur, right? They have all this, all the measurements. But it's not more than 25. I think Chazanish. I think 24 is like machmer. So you have an am in front and am in the back. Just to touch on some of the points. Okay, fine. You should not have less than 3/4 of an amma in the front, because then you're really getting into brachal v'atalos. Now he says, just if you skip a little bit later on, he says towards the end, Kosav Arizal. Someone just asked me about if he's making t-shirts. It's what's something he should be worried about. So the Mishnah Berurah speaks out something he's worried. Vest who pachas pasuach melachra va'oisim by tzitzis v'ashil hem rak shetzarch lizar she'eru by pasuach. First, something you have to be careful, and I mentioned this like with the isha ribo tzitzis. You have to make sure that they're majority open. If the majority sealed on the side, you're not chayiv in tzitzis. That's a major issue. It has to be majority open, and also kosav ari. Talis cotton yoisatayv shaloye by but is ruis. I'm not sure why, but the Arizal said it's better for tzitzis not to have sleeves. So in these t-shirt tzitzis, not to have sleeves. Tzitzis shouldn't have sleeves. Again, something api kabbalah. If it's the Arizal, it's api kabbalah. And the last point is he says, which is again I think a davar pashut, that if the tzitzis rolls up, it doesn't affect it. It's still the proper shear. The fact that it's rolled up doesn't have to actually be open fully. If it rolls up under your shirt, that's fine because it's going to be unrolled in a few moments. All right, stop.